Outperforms scalable integration infrastructure for PeopleSoft and transportation management systems. My name is Glenn Johnson. I'm a Senior Vice President here at Magic Software Americas, and I'm joined today by Senior Consultant Ryan Beck. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you very much, Glenn.
And we're going to be going through our new ebook in today's webinar, and the ebook will be available to you online after the webinar, but we do want to also provide you with an opportunity to see a demonstration today of PeopleSoft integration, which you'll be able to do. And we also want to provide you with an opportunity for any questions and answers. So if you could take a moment to type in your questions into the chat box or the question box, we will look at that at the end of today's webinar, and I'm sure we'll probably have some time to go into many of those questions, if not all of them. So we encourage you to go ahead and put your questions there so that we can address those. As we looked at the things that we wanted to talk about in today's session, we identified transportation management requirements as an area of discussion, looking at the various touch points for PeopleSoft and transportation management systems, some of the integration capabilities that will help us to achieve the scalability that we're looking for with transportation management integration to PeopleSoft, and then some of the specific issues working with the PeopleSoft integration broker. We will talk a little bit about Oracle Transportation Management today and some of the details there as an example of a transportation management system that you may be integrating with PeopleSoft, but we recognize that there are also a number of third-party integrations that we have been called upon to perform in the past to other transportation systems, such as RoadNet, formerly UPS RoadNet, and many, many others. There are a good dozen leading applications out there used by a number of different enterprises, as well as some regional and specialized players. And so we certainly encourage you to bring those specialized integration challenges to us, because that's where often the platform that we're talking about shines. So let's talk about transportation management systems. There's a big new player in the room when we talk about integration to transportation management, and that, of course, is mobile apps. Mobile apps are not new this year, but certainly we're seeing more requests, more interest, not just interest, but really projects related to transportation management integration to mobile apps than ever before. And this is one of the requirements in 2014 that we're really excited about, because we're seeing companies get very creative and really finding value for their businesses as they find ways to utilize mobile systems. A lot of the PeopleSoft users that have transportation management systems in place, as well as users of other ERP systems, are finding that mobile apps are able to enable their fleet drivers as well as fleet managers to really find more efficient ways of communicating, more efficient ways of transacting business, and the features of mobile are just obviously well aligned with the needs of transportation management in terms of ability to leverage GPS and other features related to the device, cameras, barcode scanning, and so on. So transportation management systems are creating requirements for mobile apps that do things like routing, scheduling, confirmation notes, and other TMS functions. And those functions can be distilled into very distinct mobile apps for access to current information. And that visibility, of course, requires integration to the back-end system, to the TMS, as well as to the ERP and other systems. And the ERP systems want to know what happened in that mobile environment that affects the execution of the business process. So it's a two-way, bidirectional need for exchange of information. We're seeing that as the cost of the mobile devices is dropping, drivers, owner-operators increasingly have smartphones, tablets, onboard computers, and according to a recent survey by Green Road, about 2/3 of fleet managers are reporting that all or most of their drivers are making some work-related use of smartphones now. That number can only go up, and one of the things that's driving this is the fact that the lower cost of devices is making it more affordable to deliver onboard apps than it was in the past. And Green Road is suggesting that fleet managers themselves are really the innovators in many cases. They're leading the adoption of mobile apps. 60% of them are using things in addition to email on their smartphones in terms of apps that they're running. So that's up from what past numbers would have suggested. So we're seeing increasing adoption, fleet managers kind of leading the way, and drivers and owner-operators are also coming on board, especially as the apps are being created. As you create the apps, the adoption rates are good, and when an implementation includes integration, the adoption rates are excellent. So that's what we're finding, is that integration is really key, because then you know that you have fresh, current information in a usable app versus an app that is being roadblocked, if you will, because there's no access to the back-end information. Just to kind of establish, what we're talking about when we talk about transportation management systems, the requirements in general for a TMS system are for fleet purchasing, fleet management, licensing, keeping track of damages and insurance, vehicle work orders, rental and leasing systems for those fleets, maintenance systems, dealing with regulatory requirements, the U.S. Department of Transportation and the EPA, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, various labor agreements. There's a number of regulatory dimensions that often are tracked by these systems. And then we also see requirements in the area of yard management. With a large yard, just finding, the equipment can be an issue, and so there are yard management systems and components and modules for that. Fuel management, of course, is huge right now with the emphasis on green transportation, and that dovetails in with the areas of dispatch, scheduling, and routing, which many view as core to the capabilities of transportation management systems. And then you also have requirements among many users for delivery management, freight forwarding capabilities, device interfaces that are leveraged are also becoming a big part of it. How does it use the GPS, RFID, barcoding on these various mobile and handheld devices? And then sort of a sister area to TMS would be the area of direct store delivery, which could be an entire topic of conversation unto itself. But certainly from an integration standpoint, often the issues are very, very similar. And as we look at these trends, then we see that transportation management sort of fits within a broader range of requirements in many enterprises for mobile supply chain and logistics apps. About 1 in 5 enterprises is working on something in this area in terms of mobile app integration. And when these overlap with core business functions, of course, this is a requirement in order to be effective. We see information from UPS's global supply chain study, for example, suggesting that a large percentage of companies are actually trying to improve their post-sales return capabilities and also reduce lead times, as both are identified as high priorities for these organizations. The requirements for supply chain management, excuse me, someone's trying to reach me by cell phone. The requirements for supply chain management include the device capabilities for doing things like barcoded inventory, cycle counts, shipment tracking, being able to process POs, do the receiving putaways, and so forth. So in the area of SCM, we see a lot of this coming up. Driving all of this is a kind of foundational capability. Often 2D barcoding is a key requirement and something that is influencing, of course, device selection and the approach that's being taken for supply chain. In terms of warehouse management, there's a lot of paper-based reporting in the past, where you had monthly, weekly reports or whatever being printed out and, poured through and all that, decisions being made, and the game has changed. Now it's all, tablet or smartphone-based. You have the ability to get real-time alerts and drill-down capabilities to see, what are the key performance indicators, the KPIs, for picks and putaways and cycle counts and so forth within the warehouse. And so we're seeing growth in this segment as well. Overall, across logistics, there's a need for mobile apps that aid in cartonization, rate comparisons, third-party logistics interfaces, tracking, obviously, to answer the classic question, where's my stuff? And a host of other logistics-related management issues. Track and trace and is going to continue to drive demand for mobile devices and apps, and we're finding that it's not just for professionals anymore. There are a number of apps that are incorporating track and trace capabilities that are really designed for trading partners, that are designed for consumers, that are designed for employees within the organization that are outside of the logistics team, and everybody wants to know, where is my stuff, where is my customer stuff, when will it arrive, and so on. So that's a really key driving force for new applications that may have track and trace as a secondary purpose of the application. So as we're identifying integration touch points, we want to say, in addition to integrating our transportation management system to PeopleSoft Enterprise, what else might be a part of this integration requirement? Logistics systems are focusing on a variety of areas, transportation management being in the focus today, but there's also warehouse management, order fulfillment, and so on. They're relying on CRM and ERP data, and also integration to e-commerce platforms, to common carrier and small package delivery web services, to your in-house logistics systems, to third-party EDI messaging, email messaging, and of course specialized systems for inventory and warehouse management. So the requirements around order fulfillment have very similar touch points and targets, simply relating to the more specific area of confirmation of order information and so on. With the order tracking, we're now actually looking at the integration targets for that. Order tracking is an area that is going to leverage specialized device capabilities, including signature scanners, RFID barcoding especially, and so these continue to be important dimensions of the integration requirements. M-commerce impacts the transportation management system picture as well, and we see a number of integration targets for these systems, and as well as just the platforms themselves. And they're generating a lot of the primary data that is then being incorporated into the TMS. Sometimes it comes via the ERP. Sometimes the integration information flow is in parallel from the e-commerce platform to the ERP and the transportation management system simultaneously. Field service will be the last one here that I'll talk about, and really looking at the overall life cycle of field service. Again, there are a number of integration points that we look at, and where we're looking at the whole service life cycle. Well, we said we would talk about OTM, Oracle Transportation Management, and I wanted to look at these 6 areas, discuss a little bit about the message XML that OTM makes available, look at some comparison of the methods that are available, good, better, best kind of capabilities across a few criteria, so we'll do that. Consider the available message transaction codes, what those can mean for us. Investigate a little bit about the transmission logic of the Oracle Transportation Management System messaging. Just a word about shipping units, and then we'll talk about the integration, or better, integration of the OTM interface. Apologize for that typo. So OTM message XML is basically the API schema that's provided by Oracle Transportation Management, or part of the API schema that's provided, and it's one of the options that we have, and it basically provides for inbound and outbound data exchange. You can do it with mobile devices, such as the onboard computers and sensors, and the message XML schema can be used for flows of information that are both inbound and outbound to OTM. The message itself, message acknowledgement, and the message report are basically text that's encoded in just an XML schema, and they're defined in this thing called the message XML schema file for OTM. So that is the basic API capability, but there's some comparison of other methods that we want to look at here. So with Magic XPI, which we'll be talking about in more detail in a moment, you have several ways to bring integration transmissions to Oracle Transportation Management. So the most common would be a type of web services known as RESTful web services. This involves HTTP post. Really close second today is probably SOAP web-based web services. Very rarely you'll see people using Oracle Advanced Queuing via JMS, but that's an option. So let's take a moment to consider, which method you might use. So, as always, it's going to depend on your situation, your requirements. But as we look at these, the best performance comes from REST. And so if we're really looking at scalability of transportation management system to ERP integration, and specifically PeopleSoft, from a performance standpoint, REST is excellent. Has the least overhead, and we're obviously kind of leaning in that direction somewhat. SOAP is very similar, but it has a lot more message overhead, and so it's only, we would say, good in terms of performance. In terms of reliability, it's normal. And in terms of interoperability, REST is perhaps less standardized, and therefore we could say moderate, although most people are willing to put up with that. SOAP is the most standardized, the most universally accepted method of integration, and then if we were looking at JMS, Java Message Service, it's the least standard. It is a standard, don't get me wrong, but it's just not used nearly as much. It's a more specialized way of messaging, let's face it. However, if reliable messaging is the #1 requirement, then that's where JMS shines. And because you have confirmation of message receipt delivery acknowledgement, all of that built into the messaging platform, that's where it's most powerful. Performance is normal. We're not going to say bad, but the reliable messaging affects performance. It slows down the process. There's more communication going back and forth with each transaction, and so it's something to consider. Now, you can build in confirmations to RESTful methods as well, and therefore that becomes sort of an interesting option, but it's a little more work on the REST side, obviously, and not necessarily built into the approaches that are taken. A little more customization involved, or configuration, if you will. Now let's talk about the message transaction codes. We're not going to go into each one here, but the options that are here are giving you the capabilities that you need in order to communicate between OTM and other applications. So if you're doing OTM or even GTM integration, because GTM is very similar in terms of relying upon OTM's foundation for message schemas, then you're going to have a lot of control using an integration platform like Magic XPI to leverage these various methods in message transaction codes. The logic is such that you can check username and password credentials. You can separate transmissions into distinct transactions. You can send acknowledgments to the sender. You can validate things like foreign keys, data types, transaction codes, and the other required elements. So there's validation built into all of this, logging and triggering of events through agents, waiting for pre-persist events. So the OTM transmission logic is more than just a simple exchange of files. Or file transmission. It's much more than that. Just a word about shipping units. The basic, is shipping units. Was shipment delivered or not? Just looking at it overall. However, you can utilize order ship units or order line ship units as well, and this allows you to allocate expense for things like weight, volume, quantities, and rating. That's something you want to kind of use as sort of a foundational understanding is, what are the shipping units basis for all of this, because it's going to impact things on the PeopleSoft side as well. As far as the OTM interface integration, there are three systems that we talk about. The invoice interface, which of course is, sending information about invoices, who's paying for the shipping, transportation charges, and so forth. There's the item master interface, which is basically looking at the descriptions and the package information, and then the financial system feed interface, which is allowing you to use those shipments as the final step in managing financials. So this is on both sell side and buy side. So again, this is a very useful component of OTM so that you can utilize that to trigger then invoicing, for example, in the back-end system. So how do we work with OTM? How do we work with PeopleSoft Integration Broker? Well, we're doing that through the Magic XPI integration platform. There are a lot of requirements for integration because people have remote offices, different business units. They need transportation management information in real time in order to enhance and improve the customer experience. And so enterprise integration allows us to automate our supply chain, to optimize our business processes, and to incorporate the integration of e-commerce to our back-end systems, and really is an improvement over manual approaches. Manual approaches that use point-to-point integration are fragile. They're not future-proof, so that when you upgrade one system, you typically have to reprogram the interface. Versus the advantages of utilizing an integration platform where the component is utilizing the approved API methodologies and is updated to those new methodologies as they're available. It really future-proofs your integration processes and eliminates or reduces the likelihood of any sort of work required as you move from one version to another of the back-end systems of PeopleSoft or your OTM or whatever transportation management system you're using. So in working with Magic XPI, we're providing a very configurable, code-free approach that's based on a very scalable integration architecture. And There's an in-memory data grid built into Magic XPI that provides it with co-location of memory and processing so that you can achieve dynamic scaling. This is basically unlimited virtual, vertical, and horizontal scaling capabilities then in your integration architecture, so that regardless of the scale of the number of shippers, shipments, items, whatever, that you have great ability to keep up with all of that, including a perfect environment for mobile integration. The Magic XPI integration platform is twinned with the Magic XPA application platform that can provide you with all of those mobile interfaces and applications that you need for that environment as well. So there's a very strong message there around many-to-many mobile integration on any back-end system, any mobile device being integrated along with your PeopleSoft Enterprise and your transportation management system. So with Magic XPI, you have support for a wide range of back-end applications and technology endpoints in order to orchestrate this business process integration, as we'll see in just a couple moments in the demonstration. And that is going to leverage capabilities for orchestration, for message transformation, for routing, monitoring, and management built on top of that in-memory data grid, and servicing a wide variety of not only enterprise applications, as we've mentioned, but also the databases, the frameworks, the communication protocols, some of them we've mentioned, REST, JMS, SOAP, and so on. Now, that in-memory data grid is highly fault-tolerant, uses redundancy and scalability, so that when that integration data comes into peak periods, their latency is near zero, and you really have excellent performance of the integration architecture. In terms of PeopleSoft and that side of the integration picture, the integration broker, of course, of PeopleSoft is utilized in order to expose information, bring information in and out of PeopleSoft. So we talked about message XML on the OTM side. Now in PeopleSoft, suddenly we're talking about web services. So we're talking about two different protocols. And interestingly, even if we were talking about the same protocol, there's still a need for intermediation. The data formats and the structure of the web services in PeopleSoft are not going to be the same as the data formats and the structures in other applications. These are built by completely different teams of developers in different companies at different times, and then brought together through a process of acquisition. And the structures are not immediately compatible. They require intermediation. And so the Magic XPI integration platform is basically going to give you the ability, as Ryan's going to show us, to do data mapping between sources and destinations that is able to overcome those logical inconsistencies in the information by doing concatenations and joins and logical operations and arithmetic and numeric operations on the information, textual parsing, and so on that needs to take place. So that is very powerful. We use the Magic XPI integration platform then to communicate with the PeopleSoft integration broker as a Tier 1 ERP system. PeopleSoft is, of course, providing an excellent API to us in the PeopleSoft integration broker, and one that we leverage then to best effect for integration to these other systems. So as you look at it in terms of what's possible, you have the PeopleSoft integration broker working with Magic XPI and other Oracle Edge applications, third-party applications with Fusion, if you have Fusion in your environment, and it just makes everything much more straightforward in terms of accomplishing those business process flows between all of these systems. So if you have that Oracle AII or PIP in that environment, you can have a mixed or hybrid process going on by use of Fusion integration as well as Magic XPI integration with these backend systems, and you're definitely going to find great value in taking the Magic XPI approach. For one thing, it opens up the mobile environment, but uses the protection of your firewall to make sure that you have security in place so that you're doing user authentication, you're doing encryption and decryption of messaging, and you're taking advantage of the firewall rather than just breaking through the firewall, and that is powerful as well. So PeopleSoft Integration Broker working with Magic XPI and Magic XPA is key. The approaches that are taken can also incorporate other types of collaboration systems like SharePoint. We can bring that into the picture, so you can have Magic XPI extending through SharePoint the information that's back end in the PeopleSoft environment to large numbers of additional users. The same would be hold true for your transportation management system, so that you can have a SharePoint application with a user interface on it that is exposing information bidirectionally between PeopleSoft, your transportation management system, and SharePoint. Now, if you put that all together, then you're incorporating cloud applications, your website, your e-commerce capabilities, collaboration tools, Oracle Edge and third-party applications, and PeopleSoft Enterprise with mobile apps, all protected through secure methods and integrating everything together. So that was the conclusion of the formal presentation. What I'd like to do now is take a moment to pass the baton over to Ryan, and Ryan should be able to share his desktop with us now. That's going to mean that we'll actually be able to see Magic XPI, and Ryan can show us how to this integration all works. So Ryan, it looks like you're ready to go, and we're looking forward to what you have to show us today.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a live demonstration of using Magic XPI to integrate a few different applications, including PeopleSoft, as you can guess, which is up on the screen. And we're going to go ahead and move data back and forth between PeopleSoft and SharePoint. And we'll look at how that works and how easy it is and what that can do for you. So the scenario here is if we have inside of PeopleSoft management of our different vendors, who we're allowed to buy stuff from, what their contact information is, things like that. And you might want to expose that in an outside application because you might need to be able to create POs, and they might need to be able to just simply look up who is our vendor for some sort of piece of equipment, who are we allowed to buy from this year. So we want to make that information available outside so they don't have to log into PeopleSoft to see that. It'll be available to the organization. So here I have our vendors here on locked here in PeopleSoft. And I've also got a similar location in SharePoint. So here's my SharePoint vendors. There's only one in there. You can see we'll add some more in here in a second. So what we're actually doing is we're going to create a sync between these. Well, whenever there's information that changes in PeopleSoft, we're going to use Magic XPI to notify SharePoint. So it'll send out an outbound message to say, this is changed, and here you go, and update your information. So there's only one record on here in SharePoint, so that's going to change here in a second. I'm going to go back to PeopleSoft, and I'm going to find just find any record. So I'm going to click on this one here. It says Disney, I guess. That looks fun. I'm going to go ahead and hit the correct history button to change it, and then switch to the address tab, and maybe we'll go in and change this information here to say like 123 Catella Avenue in Anaheim. Then I'm going to hit the save button. What's going to happen when I do that is PeopleSoft is going to send Magic XPI a notice that that action has happened. Magic XPI is then going to receive that over HTTP, and it's going to attempt to add the information to our SharePoint list. So it's basically just going to receive that update for us automatically. So 1 second, here it goes. So I can see it's coming into Magic, and now it's working on connecting to SharePoint, and there you go. So it's pretty quick. It's basically, because that is a real-time sync. It's not just near real-time where we're waiting for something to happen. It's not a batch thing that's going to happen at 5 o'clock tonight. It is actually a real-time notification from PeopleSoft. So I can go into this record, and I can see all the same information that we have on the other side. Now, Magic was smart enough to see that this was a new record to SharePoint. So you see it just created a new one. If I go down to the bottom here, you see it was created at 11:35 a.m., which is the local time here in Southern California. So if I go and wanted to change it again from the PeopleSoft side, let's say we make this 1234 Cattell Avenue with the suite 44 and hit save. It's going to do the same thing. It'll send an outbound notification, but Magic's going to know not to create a new record. It's actually going to go ahead and modify the existing one that we have. So it'll be basically not creating duplicates. After a couple seconds, we should see the new information pop into here and update the address. It actually does take a couple seconds sometimes, but it'll come in. So the interesting thing here is that we can actually also do a bidirectional sync. We can actually send information back into PeopleSoft. So I'll try that, and then we'll go in and see what that does to affect the record on the PeopleSoft side. So anyway, so now you can see here the address change that came in. It takes about a couple seconds for it to map in, and then it's all there. So next, I'm going to go ahead and exit this record out of the PeopleSoft interface. I'm going to get out of it. And I'm going to try and change it from the SharePoint side. And we'll see if we can change it back, get it to change here in PeopleSoft. So what I'll do here is I'm going to click Edit. You can see it actually had all the latest revisions from PeopleSoft. So I'm going to edit this. Now you may not want to be able to do this, so you could not allow it. We did for the demo. So I'm going to actually allow a change of it. I'm going to try and change this to suite, let's say 999. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this is a C for change. I'm not doing an A. That's just a PeopleSoft internal piece of information. I'll put that on there and hit OK. And after a couple seconds, Magic's going to realize that this record now has a send action, and it needs to send it to PeopleSoft. In fact, it already did it. It was that fast. So it sent it to PeopleSoft. It resent a send flag to no, and then it gave me a transaction ID. This is a new piece of information that just came in. So this transaction ID is my, was generated by PeopleSoft when this record was sent to PeopleSoft. It is a unique value I can go use to track down this change. Maybe it didn't make it all the way. Maybe it failed data validation. I can use this to go in and see, okay, what was sent to PeopleSoft, what did it not like, and start to debug from there. So we'll take this in case we need it, and we're going to go back to the PeopleSoft side and see if we do a search again, if the record has been modified. So I'm going to go back to vendors, do a search, find our Disney one. And actually the return, I understand the return trip actually does sometimes take a little bit longer. So it hasn't been done yet, but we can go down and track, we can actually go in and track that one I told you about. If we go to the, if we log into the asynchronous services, you can actually see behind the scenes how this data was moving in and out of PeopleSoft. We have something called the vendor sync, which is just an the internal broker in PeopleSoft. And we can see the messages coming in and out. So I can see outbound messages that were going to Magic. I can also see the information any information that's coming back in. So if we see any changes, they'll be on here as well. So we can kind of dig into each one and see, all right, what's the information that was either sent or received. We can look at I can actually look at the data itself and see if there were any errors. So maybe this one needed to be resubmitted. And we can see incoming data. We can see outgoing data. There's a lot of traceability here. And actually, I can see the problem right here. It looks like, in this case, address 2 wasn't actually mapped. So if I were to change it, it wouldn't actually be reflected on the other side. So that's an easy change. So how would we go and do that? Well, what we're going to do is I'm going to go behind the scenes and open up Magic XPI and go ahead and show you how we were able to create this sync between the two. So this is the visual design environment called Magic XPI Studio. It's something really only the developer sees, or maybe the people that are administrating the project, but typically it's just for the developer, and it's basically the design environment where we create the metadata that says how to connect our applications. This is where we create connections to other systems, so it kind of becomes sitting in the middle, where it now is sort of like the hub and spoke of everything. And then using those connections that we create, we go ahead then and orchestrate how we want the data to move from one side to the other. It's made up of these little icons here that are everywhere. And these icons are what we call components, and they're designed to talk to another system or move data around internally, or work with something like a database or anything like that. So these icons are, you can see they all have a different look and feel. The reason is because those are different applications they connect to. So the SharePoint icon connects to SharePoint. In this case, our HTTP icon connects to PeopleSoft. And of course, we've got Salesforce and some other things in there. This demo is actually doing a lot of stuff. So what we've got going on here is at the top, we have what's called our HTTP trigger. It's listening for incoming HTTP connections, RESTful XML coming in from PeopleSoft. And when anything comes in, it starts running these components that are down here. So it does things like this, which is basically checking to see if the record exists. And then if it doesn't, it's going to go this way to the right and add it to PeopleSoft. If it does, it'll actually go down to the left and update it. So that was our difference between our add and our update. We can look at the add by just doing a right click and hitting map, and we can see what it's doing. And on our left side is PeopleSoft. On our right side is SharePoint. So we can see the relationship between them. So for instance, if I wanted to map business unit from PeopleSoft into something over here in our SharePoint application, I could do that very easily. So there's where we change our mappings, and I could see that on the way in, we saw that address 2 populated from the vendor address in PeopleSoft. So later on, we'll go and see if we can get address 2 to populate from the other side from SharePoint coming back. So there's our mapping for that. Okay. Then we can look at how easy it is just to make new connections. So if I wanted to go ahead and send some data to let's say a SharePoint, all I need to do is drag a new component over, drop it on the flow, and it kind of comes in like that. And then I can just go and configure it and say I want to work with a list or a document library or anything we support. And once you pick your list, and it kind of does a service discovery to figure out what lists are available on the server, I could then say I can do an add, update, query, delete. So all these things are available, so I can just go ahead and say, hey, I want to add some information to that list, or maybe I want to do an update. So it's pretty straightforward. You pick what you want, and it becomes available in a data mapper, and then you can start mapping your data in very quickly. The idea here is that the components themselves are wrapping up all of the hard parts about communicating with the other integrated applications. So they basically handle all the security models, how to connect to them, how to send, just basically how to send the bits over the wire. Now that what that does is it abstracts me from it and it lets me just kind of connect the dots at a higher level, at a business process level, more than at a really, really technical level. So for instance, the SharePoint component in that case knows how to connect any version of SharePoint from 2004 up to like 2013. And then on the other side, connecting to PeopleSoft, it's actually even simpler. We have an HTTP component, And I'll show you here where we're sending the data to PeopleSoft. This is our HTTP component. It's a RESTful. We can do all kinds of different things. Here we just do a simple post. We actually are compatible with REST now, so you can do post, put, head, delete, of course, get. So you have all different HTTP actions you can do, which makes it compatible with not only RESTful interfaces, but all types of NoSQL databases. And then we have our simple way to go ahead and map our request back into PeopleSoft. So I can see then on the right side is the data we're sending to PeopleSoft. And you'll see there's some stuff we mapped in from SharePoint. And then there's a lot of stuff that was just maybe like hard-coded values. So if there was something missing, it'd be really easy to go in and see, okay, did we map the correct address? Maybe we took address 2 from the wrong place. It looks like we did, but maybe we didn't send the right information. So we can kind of dig in here and see, all right, what did we actually send? So besides the fact that PeopleSoft is keeping track of the integration messages, we can also see them in what's called the Magic XPI Monitor. And the Magic XPI Monitor is what I have up on my screen now. It's basically a tool that lets me see what projects are running and what aren't. So I've got most of these are red because they're off. But we have a new one here called PeopleSoft with a spelling error in it, I see. And if I go into it, I do see the green light. I know it's running. I know how hard it's working. And when I go into it, I can see the messages that are coming back. So I see vendor number 56 here was updated at 11:35 when we did it earlier, and then again at 11:36. And then I can also see the information we're sending back to PeopleSoft at 11:38. So I can see the request we sent it. So I can actually double-click this paperclip here. I'll do that again. If I double-click the paperclip, I can see the actual message we're sending to PeopleSoft. That's great because it allows me to debug anything that might have happened without having to replay the message and do it again. So I can see the header we sent that gets it into the data queue called vendor sync, right, the one I showed you when we were logged into PeopleSoft. And I can see all of the messages that were sent. So if I want to see, okay, why did address 2 not get in there, I can just kind of scroll down to where I see it. And I see address 2 was actually empty. Oh, wait a minute, that's weird. So that means that I just did something was missing out of SharePoint when I sent it. So that's what got sent. Okay, so that I know that the error is not on the PeopleSoft side. It's somewhere in my data entry side. So I can start exploring it there. So this is actually really nice. The monitor allows you to also control your project. You can just turn it on, turn it off. Typically, once you deploy a Magic project, it becomes a Windows service. It's just running in the background on a Windows server or VM somewhere, and connecting and orchestrating all of its endpoints and things like that. So you really just you don't have much visibility into it without using the monitor. So that's why we have this, because you don't need to. There's no user interaction. When I was working with PeopleSoft, I didn't have to click any Magic buttons or have any Magic software installed on my workstation to get that to work. Same thing on SharePoint. I didn't need anything. It's entirely a server-to-server integration, which means that deployment and updating and maintenance and everything is very, very simple. And you don't need to know everybody's. You don't need to have people update their passwords into any tools or anything like that. That's hokey. It's all very simple and centrally managed. When we're logging into these interfaces, all of the credentials to get into them are centrally managed inside our resource, what's called our resource repository. So in here I have, for instance, the credentials to log into SharePoint. They're all here, and then the password's encrypted, and it tells me it allows me to essentially manage what we're connecting to. So if something changes, like this password for SharePoint or the server you want to hit, it's all in here where the server administrators don't have to understand the integration. They just need to go in and plug in the new credentials. So it's saved in an easy way. It's better than putting things in an INI file because there's validation here. I can hit the validate button. It'll do a test connection and tell me if it's good. So it tells me that my password is good. Also, we have then here the endpoint for PeopleSoft. So here I just did something simple. We just plugged in the, we did a couple iterations of how to connect to PeopleSoft. So we've got a couple here. This is the one we're actually using. And you can see the endpoint here of how we actually went into. So we're just pushing data into the HTTP listening connector, which is a more RESTful-based interface. It has an envelope that's kind of proprietary, but you push some XML in, and there you go. It's pretty straightforward. So there's a lot of components that exist in the studio. A lot of them are application specific. So we have components for things like JD Edwards or SharePoint or SAP type applications. And we also have a lot of generic adapters that really work with anything. So like our data mapper works with all kinds of flat files, all kinds of databases like Oracle and Microsoft SQL and DB2 and really anything you can get into with ODBC. We have a directory scanner which will watch a local folder or a network folder or an FTP server for files coming in and out. And then, of course, HTTP, which I showed you, and FTP, which is very common integration because you'll have to move data around all the time. And all kinds of different things in our toolbox here, like LDAP and working with publishing information, validation, working with XML, and of course web services. And a lot of these can be used not just to consume other web services, they can be used to provide web services or provide HTTP endpoints. So your other applications can even call us, like PeopleSoft did, but it could be something else as well. So it's a pretty robust and reusable tool in that once you've maybe created a simple integration between two applications, you might reuse it to add in a third one or connect to different applications. You can do that because a Magic XPI server will support running multiple applications simultaneously. So you've got here our PeopleSoft POC, and our coworker put a spelling error in there, and we leave that there just to remind him. But then I could also go and start another application that might be talking to two completely different applications. So I can just start this at one and then turn on that one. It'll run as well in parallel. The cool thing about it is the whole architecture is multi-threaded. So we have basically the ability to not only process two multiple records at once, but different whole projects all at once. So so basically, if something happens where there's a high demand and lots of people are modifying stuff in PeopleSoft or SharePoint, they're not going to slow each other down because they're running on different threads. So there's basically almost like using different CPU cores on your processor. They're just going off through different queues and being done in parallel. Glenn, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Ryan. Yeah, we'll give people a moment to enter those questions into the question box or the chat box, and we'll take those as they come in. As you're entering your questions there about anything that was discussed in the demonstration or in the formal presentation, that'd be fine. First one, what EDI messaging support is provided?
We'll do all types of EDI. We obviously, just at the basic level, we support all different types of flat files, positional and delimited. And then if you're talking about actual X12 encoding, we do have a component that will handle all types of, a lot of different types of EDI, the most common ones like invoices, purchase orders, and all types of, I don't have the list in front of me, but it's quite voluminous. If you email us, we'll get you the extensive list.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ryan. How does XPI composite the REST messages?
How does it composite them? I'm not sure I understand the question. Like probably how are we creating the messages? So, well, it depends. REST is kind of just it's not really a standard, it's a style, right? So if you're sending XML, we use a data mapper to create a request. So on the right side, I'm creating an XML here, and I map in some data that I want to create. And a lot of tools have XML mappers, so that's probably pretty common you've seen. And you can see on the right, each one of these little icons is what's called a node. And then I have some structure to it. There's some, I can dig in and see what the elements are. If it's something else, like if we're sending, JSON, and we're sending just HTTP variables, then it's a little bit different. But that's pretty much the idea.
Well, that actually ties into our next question. Can I incorporate tokens or verticals into the data maps?
Tokens. Yeah, we can certainly send, like for instance, security tokens, things like that. Yeah, you can certainly send HTTP headers or HTTP variables, things like that, in and out, fully supported. So, not a problem.
Okay. And how do you determine the physical server requirements for integration?
That really comes down to transaction volume. Typically, a server, we have a pretty small footprint, so typically a Magic XPI server would either be a physical server or VM with at least 2 cores assigned and at least 4 gigs of memory at the minimum. But that gets you that would actually process thousands and thousands and thousands of transactions a day. If you go up from there, you might need more cores or more memory, but it shouldn't be much more.
Does XPI need to be in the same network with PeopleSoft Integration Broker?
It does not. The PeopleSoft connection is HTTP, so it would work very well at larger distances.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I don't see any other questions coming in, so I want to thank you very much, Ryan, again for your demonstration, and to all of you for your attention. We look forward to seeing you again soon on another Magic Software webinar. Have a great day.